Hi, everybody. I want to welcome everybody to the first of our digital series of webinars to help the Alachua County families who are choosing the Digital Academy option to help our kiddos navigate this process the best that we can. Today, we are fortunate enough to have Ms. Karen Arnold with us, who is going to help us talk together and understand the concepts a little bit better. I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of feedback in my ear. Okay, that's what I'm doing. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Apologies for that. Okay, so Karen is a licensed and nationally certified school psychologist. She is in private practice and she works with families in Gainesville and in the surrounding communities. She got her MED and her EDS in school psychology from UF, so go Gators. She's worked with schools and clinical settings and private practice for over 2 decades, so we're quite fortunate to have her experience here tonight. Her training, her specialty areas are developmental psychology, early intervention, and educational strategies. So she really provides a wide range of services. So she's knowledgeable in everything from assessments to consultation and training. And she works with pre-K all the way through to college age. So welcome, Karen, and welcome everyone. And why don't I just turn it over to you, Karen, and tell us about how we can help our kids learn the best in this e-learning format.
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate you guys asking me here today. And so I'm pretty excited to be here and hopefully have some information to share as we all are on this journey together. I am too, as a parent, trying to figure out how to help my youngest daughter navigate distance learning as well. We all started sort of last year, in an emergency situation. So we're hoping now it's going to be a little bit different, that we're going to be able to navigate it in a little more of an informed way, I hope. I'm going to try to share my screen and hopefully that works to do. So yes, let's see. So I just sort of, I was just thinking about distance learning, and the analogy in my mind as a former distance runner, I wish I still was a distance runner, it made me think of really a couple of key points, is that flexibility and endurance are key. And I think that just like running that long race, distance learning is going to require both of those things from us as parents. We have this strong desire, and I know I have since, mid-March or whenever it was, to have the sense of normalcy return to life. And instead I'm finding myself in this ever-changing idea of what the new normal is, and distance learning is our new normal for a lot of us. And so the kind of the terms I keep hearing and having pop in my mind about how to respond is that we just have to be agile. We have to be sort of like athletes, in the sense that we have to pivot and change and be flexible. And so even when we devise kind of a way of working with our children, we have to be open to the fact that maybe we have to change as we go along. But when we're setting the stage for success with our children, these are the things that I call, to myself at least, the no-brainers. And I say that because in my mind, I keep thinking, Karen, these are the things you can control, so don't forget them. These are your no-brainers. And that is really trying to keep a consistent routine, especially bedtime and wake time. And this is really applies to all ages, whether they're a preschooler or they're a high schooler. Once you get into a consistent routine, you're going to be more attentive and able to focus. I know that back when everything sort of happened with COVID, and we were on spring break, and then spring break was extended, and then it was extended a little bit more. And then suddenly we found ourselves doing distance learning with really whacked out routines where everyone stayed up super late, like it was summertime, and got up super late. And it just made it a lot harder to get into a routine. And so I think establishing that now and from the beginning, even though you're not having to rush to get out of the door for school, setting a time to go to bed and get up, and keeping it pretty flexible, of course, but that's going to be pretty key. Some other no-brainers in my mind are making sure you have at least a small meal with protein in it in the mornings. So good fuel for your brain, for your child's brain, and for your own brain. And then given that distance learning, just by its very nature, is going to require much more on-screen time, trying to figure out ways to avoid unnecessary screen time for your child, and especially in the evenings. And then making sure you're staying active, that your child is getting some breaks to engage in physical activity. So those are all the things that really kind of set the foundation in my mind for being optimally ready to learn. Um, and then just in terms of establishing routines and in some goal setting, most teachers, in fact, probably all teachers, regardless of the grade level, are establishing at the beginning of the school year, for the first day, maybe the first week, routines for their classroom. And they're setting goals for their students, the academic goals or emotional behavioral goals that they want their students in the classroom to make. And so that's the process that we have to do as parents right now, is trying to figure out a schedule based on what the distance learning for your child is going to look like, what works the best. So when are their classes? When are their breaks? And the two of you, were with each of your children, if you have more than one child, will have to sit down and sort of figure that out. As they're older, they'll be able to take on more of the responsibility of that, but they still may need some guidance. I know that that looked very different for both of my children. They're both high schoolers. One just graduated from high school, and they had different kind of techniques for doing that, and they needed input at times. And then also just really talking to them about what are their goals for the first grading period or for the first week of school, and then beyond that, and helping them kind of figure that out and make it concrete, because being at home and doing school when you're not used to that can not feel like it's school. So it's easy to let those sorts of things slide and slip away. And I think there's something super important. I look around my office and I look at the backboard of where I'm looking now, and I see inspirational quotes, schedule. And I think that for our kids, posting, what you guys have worked out for a schedule and their goals somewhere in the classroom, I mean, not in the classroom, but in your home, can be pretty powerful. It can be just a place to go, oh yeah, this is what's going on at this time of the day. And it can give your child, especially a younger child, a more of a sense of security, like, okay, I know what's happening. It's not just random. I'm not going to have to work all day long. And it can also just remind your older child, for instance, of their goals that they have, so they can stay on task for those goals.
No,
And then
Karen,
at the end, yes.
Karen, I really love that, because one of the things that a lot of families have been posting about on the page is, how am I going to set up the study space? What am I going to do? And I think everybody's thinking about what computer system do I need, or what chairs, or where am I going to, put a table? But I think it's a really important thing, what you just said, to, as we're considering that space, to also think about creating a space that really highlights what those goals are.
Yes, I think, and it works for me. It's super powerful. I think it's something that all of us could use in our lives, and no matter our age. Obviously, with younger children, they're going to need more guidance with that. But then, just in the beginning, as we were talking, or as I was mentioning, like that the process really requires that we be flexible, is to sort of revisit what worked and didn't work. And it may be on a weekly basis as you're establishing that routine and getting things going. So if some things in the way you set up the work schedule worked and some didn't, then figure out a way to praise the things that did work, and then acknowledge this part didn't work as well, and maybe this is why. A good example I have of that would be last year. One of my daughters was working in her bedroom. She had a desk, she had her own quiet space, but there were too many temptations for projects, creative things to do. And so we had to revisit that, and she said, I just couldn't stay on track. And so we sort of talked about, well, what could you do? I mean, you don't want me to monitor you constantly, right? So she decided that working downstairs in a place at the kitchen table was a good place for her, as long as we were able to keep all the other, like TV noises and things like that away. So it's just a process of sort of problem solving that on a regular basis. Brainstorm it together, help them come up with the solutions for themselves as they're older and able to. And when they're younger, give them more guidance in that. And other considerations is just sort of like you mentioned, Elda, with figuring out that workspace and trying to make it a space that works for them, having it clutter free as possible, and having designated places to keep supplies would be super important for a child, no matter their age. A way to keep track of materials. I know a lot of it's going to be on the screen, but in case there are actual paper materials, whether you have a crate with hanging folders, or you have an accordion folder, or a place to keep the books if you have any hard books, or even books that would sort of extend what they're learning in a certain topic, have a place in their little learning area where they can keep that, whether it's a bin that's beside the desk or table. And another, I think, powerful organizational tool is to color code by subject area. So if they have like a little bin where they're keeping information or a notebook where they're taking notes, color code those by subject. So if everything that is math is blue and everything that is English is orange, when they need to go and find materials for that, they can just look for the color and it's a little bit quicker in that sense. So those are some ways of establishing routines and goals and setting up spaces. Once you sort of have all of that established and you're going about the process of learning material, so how to figure out a way to really improve retention is important, especially when you think about the fact that not all of us learn in the same way. Some of us are great at auditory learning, and some of us really require more movement to learn. So if you have a classroom where a teacher is talking, especially as they get older, and you're having to listen to a lot of instruction orally, for a student who is an auditory learner, that's heaven for them. They can learn it well. But if someone really requires the doing and seeing of it, then that's more challenging. And so in a digital format, it may be a little more challenging when you don't have as many of those hands-on activities that are built into the classes that your child has, and maybe they will, hopefully. And I think that a good important point for this would be to collaborate with your child's teacher for activities, especially if you have a child that really does need movement and visuals to learn. And some things that you can do as a parent would be to try to figure out ways to help build their background information on topics. So if there's something that's particularly challenging or something particularly interesting, you probably can't do it for every subject area or every lesson, but try to figure out a way to sort of build some background information just to give them more to like sink their teeth into when they're learning new information. It makes making new associations easier. So looking for activities or books or outings, hopefully things that aren't as electronic, that can help your child like sort of apply what they're learning or expand what they're learning. And again, learning preferences is super important. So if you have a child who is very motor focused, sitting in front of a desk or in a desk in front of a computer is going to be challenging for them. So if they really need movement, you may want to think about maybe a chair that has a little movement involved, maybe a ball chair where they can bounce a little bit or move from side to side. For students like that, movement really is essential for starting to actually retain information. Weighted blankets help for some students who have sensory integration difficulties. They can just put a weighted blanket in their lap that can help them feel a little more centered and not needing to move as much. And anytime you're learning new information, whether it's lists or any kind of topic, try to figure out a way, number one, as we've said, to make it multi-sensory. So you're using a lot of your senses, visual, auditory, tactile, all of those things, movement. And also things that are funny or emotionally engaging are easy to remember. So you can use little tricks to help you remember information, like if you're remembering a list of people that were involved in a certain political scandal. So you can create a little image, like imagine an image of them doing silly things together. And that may be a way to help your child remember, oh, remember that silly room we set up with all those people in it, and so was playing pool with so and they, whatever you might do, or create in your own mind to kind of create some funny images around what you're learning can be helpful for some kids. Simple example would be learning the cell structure in science. And, that can be learned in early elementary all the way through, high school and beyond. And just using some real life examples for a small child, you just show them what show an apple, and like an apple is one thing, but it's sort of like a cell. So you're creating analogies, or cells are like schools, in that you've got a nucleus, which is kind of like the principal who's directing everything. So there are different little ways like that. Sharing just different information to build up that background information. So for a cell in 1960s, a certain scientist, discovered this under a microscope. He discovered what a cell looked like. And the reason he said it was a cell or cellula is because small rooms that monks lived in look like that. So you could show them what monks are. And it's just a way of kind of filling in interesting gaps that give them kind of more background on something. Or making home-based projects for younger or older. I can tell you many middle schools would love to make a cell that they could eat. So those are just some little examples of finding a way to sort of expand what your child is learning in the online format. And your teachers may actually give assignments that are collaborative or that have those kinds of extensions. I'm hoping that they will for certain. Just in terms of warning signs, because sitting in front of a computer, is something that I know I've always discouraged my children from doing, and now they're having to do it in order to learn, in order to stay educated. So just be aware of them complaining about their eyes hurting, dry and irritated, and headaches. I know that for both of my children, we had to get some blue blocker glasses because they were on the screen so much that they were getting recurring headaches from it. Neck and shoulder pain, increased impulsive behavior, increased irritability, trouble sleeping. Those are all some signs that you may want to try to figure out ways when they're not doing digital learning, that they're not using screen time as much. Having media use become an all-encompassing desire that that's all they want to do. And that would, there are some indicators that could be more of a problem. The way to address this would be to avoid the computer whenever you are able to. Don't use those screens in dark rooms. Consider some blue blockers. Those blue lights, there's some research indicating that it can disrupt the circadian rhythms. And so eliminating screens at least an hour before bedtime would be a good rule of thumb to try to stick with. The American Academy for Pediatrics recommends creating a family screen time plan. So where you really sort of sit down together and decide where and when screen time is okay, that it's not just a free-for-all, and setting some time limits on that. It's probably not the most popular stance, is setting limits on screen time with kids who really enjoy that and enjoy having those times to unwind with a screen, because it was just a fun entertainment. But now that there's so much more screen time required, it may be the time to start thinking of, okay, let's play cards, or let's go do some physical things as a family. Consider making your child's room a screen-free zone. This is especially for younger children, but I think it could apply to anyone. It is a very unpopular choice in my household. My children have always been upset that they don't have screens in their room, but it is something to consider, and it is recommended by the American Academy of Pediatrics, especially for younger children. So just to kind of keep our minds on what our kids need, and it depends on their age and how much they're growing, but that 8 to 12 hours of sleep is important. And if screen time interferes with that, then that's something we really should be aware of. They should have about an hour of physical activity a day, and then time away from media. So again, creating a plan for how to handle that, since it's really sort of been plopped in our laps of something we have to address. So those are some basic recommendations in terms of that. And I guess just want to encourage, just like I said in the beginning, that, I think we can, as parents, we can get through this, and our children can excel. We can find new ways to help them learn with the increased flexibility to sort of do things in a different format, or expand their learning in some really new and creative ways. So I just encourage people to just, stick with it, and it's worth it for certain. Thank you.
So Karen, one of the things that I am struck or thinking about listening to you talk about setting the rules and creating the goals and the family screen time plan, I like that. What I'm gathering is that I like how it sounds like it's a collaborative process where you do it together, and I'm guessing that will help reduce resistance a little bit, I'm hoping. But I'm curious if you could give some tips. If I had a kindergartner, if I had a sixth grader, or if I have an 11th grader, how might I approach that collaborative idea a little differently so it's age appropriate, right? Because I wouldn't necessarily give, I don't know, I'm thinking I wouldn't give a kindergarten the same liberty I would an 11th grader.
Right. I think that's an excellent point. You wouldn't. So obviously, for your younger children, you're going to be driving the car of goal setting and setting the schedule. And so maybe you would give smaller choices on, well, when you do have a break during the day, we're going to have these choices of things we could do. We can go outside and do something for a little bit, or we can play cards when we have some free time. But as they're older and able to make different choices, then you would give more freedom in that process, I think. But I do believe the buy-in, having your child involved as much as possible, is going to be important, because I think that they can come up with some pretty good solutions if you talk about, well, maybe this is kind of an issue I see with if we do it this way, and just approach it that way, and respectfully. But there are times where you may have to say, well, I think that this is the way we're going to try it, and then we'll evaluate and see how that goes, and and then be flexible about it as well.
I'm wondering about rewards. I'm wondering what your thoughts are about using rewards as either incentive or a reward for sticking to it for the week or something like that. I'm wondering about the use of rewards in addition to the front end setup of the structure.
Right. Yeah, I think rewards, they have a place for sure. I mean, we want our children to be fully, completely self-motivated and self-actualized, I know. But rewards have a place if you have a child that maybe needs that little bit of encouragement. But rewards can come in a lot of forms. I mean, they can come in recognition, they can come in being able to make choices, for fun things to do, activities. They can come in doing a special activity, like making a cell you can eat. Maybe not out of candy, maybe out of vegetables, or maybe out of both. Who knows? But
Candy, candy, always go candy.
but if you have a child that needs more behavioral structure and guidance, then developing a little reward system where they maybe earn stickers that can be exchanged for prizes, or a chance to earn a prize, is something that could be beneficial for some children.
Yeah, more than ever, it's so true now that there's no one flat answer for everybody, and I think it really depends on your child, your the classes they're taking, all of that. A question that was posed by one of our viewers is, how do we balance screen time when the only social interaction they will get is also online? So they've had all day of their digital academy, and then now they want to hang out with their friends on a Zoom call or playing a video game. How do we do that?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's tough. I would probably seek some social outlets that aren't quite as screen based. I mean, you could do the old fashioned phone call, but
Do kids
have
still
some
do that?
socially distant meetings potentially, like at a park fart, where you stay away from each other. I know those are really boring and not the things that any kid is going to want to hear, especially middle schoolers or high schoolers. But um, it's a balancing game for certain. And if your child is not having any trouble with those negative symptoms of being on a computer all the time, then a Zoom call with their friends is probably not going to be harmful. But if they're the type of student who's struggling with the headaches and they can't stay motivated to get finished with their work because their attention is just hard to stay focused, then maybe that has to be something that needs to be delayed for a little while. I think you would have to just see in that situation, what exactly might be going on.
I'm thinking back to when you talked about moving, kind of getting physical movement in. I wonder too about folding that in that way, about saying, okay, you can have a Zoom call later this evening after you, I don't know,
Right.
go play in the yard, or go do something else, kind of making it that condition.
Right. Yeah. Who's to even say you can't have like a movement, like if you have an older student and they want to have some bike rides with their friends and everybody's protected and distant from one another, you can have an actual real life interaction that's still safe, versus just on a computer screen. So.
Yeah, got to be creative inside the box. Here's another question. Last semester, my daughter, who was then in kindergarten, was really shy on Zoom. Even though she loved her teacher and was really comfortable with the other kids, she wouldn't speak up at all, even when they asked her a direct question. Is there anything we can do to help her be more comfortable in that virtual classroom?
That is a really relevant question for sure. It's something that I'm not comfortable speaking on in this format, and I know my children have struggled with that. My youngest daughter has, and so we actually role play. We actually pretend to do it so she can kind of get a little comfortable. She's going to kill me if any of her friends heard me saying this, but so you could do little practice sessions, like video. You have a phone, video on the phone, and like practice what it would be like to answer the teacher. It's going to be different doing it in the classroom. and just talk about, oh, you were so brave, when your teacher called on you, I could see that you were about to talk. And next time maybe you could say, like, I want to just give her like the way to start it, when your teacher asks a question. So it's definitely challenging for some children to speak up in that format because there are awkward delays, because the rules are different than speaking in person, because you're looking in different places than the faces. And all of those things are a little bit tricky. But maybe, practicing and making a game out of it when it's not time to do it could make it a little less scary, or even doing a little Zoom meeting yourself if you can get another device and you have a device and your child, you guys are practicing Zoom together. And that could be potentially a way to like get them a little more comfortable with saying something, making a joke, or so happy.
Yeah, I like that idea of, taking away the fear or the discomfort because it's unknown. So kind of that repetition and doing that. I saw a post online where, they were using screen time as the reward for wearing your mask, to kind of get kids comfortable with that. So
Right,
I think, I think anywhere where you think about different ways to tie that together. Folks, if you have questions, make sure to pop them in the YouTube chat, and we will get them answered for you. Another question is, if you are a parent and you have multiple age students all at the same time, any suggestions for how to balance the different needs of the different age levels so that not one child gets all the attention all the time?
That's tricky. Yeah, that's super hard. And I my hat's off to any parent who has to juggle that, because it is a lot more challenging, and it definitely gives us an appreciation for what some teachers face in the classroom, where they're juggling multiple abilities and lots of children. I would say that one of your best bets is going to be really try to get super organized on the front end of things. And if this is what you're devoting yourself to, if you're not working a job at the same time, then you're going to be busy, seeing what's going on with each of the children. And some of them, as they're a little bit older, may have a little more independence, and the ones that have more needs may get more attention sometimes, but there may be other times where you can balance it out. And I would just try to think about a way, like having that end of the week, let's talk about how it went this week, and how did you feel it went, and what could we do to make it better, and like really keep that communication open with your children. So you can see if they're feeling that they're getting overlooked, or if they're getting too much attention, or whatever it might be. So I think organization and just kind of keeping that communication flowing is going to be pretty important.
Yeah. It's, again, it's that balancing act. We're all going to be juggling a lot of balls to try to
Yes,
make
we
this
are.
happen for everybody. Yeah. Another question that came in is, so how do you any suggestions for parents how to manage your own anxiety or your own discomfort with the technology in a way that it doesn't communicate that to your child? So I guess what they're asking is, how do you language? How do you, really set the tone and the expectation that it's going to be a positive experience so that they can feel that too?
Right. I think that just sort of demystifying it can be one thing, like working a little bit to make yourself more comfortable. And I feel like a lot of children really do pick up on the technology pretty quickly. So I feel like my
Probably
children,
faster than us.
yes, they've taught me a lot. In fact, before tonight, I was like, okay, how do I do this on the Zoom meeting? Because I don't do Zoom meetings very often. And so my children already knew, because they'd had some practice with that at the end of the school year last year. But for younger children who are still gaining that, it's going to take them a little bit. It's going to take you. So learn it together, and sort of just say, we're in this together. It's not perfect, but we're working on it together. And I'm not too old to learn new things, and I can do this. I'm a smart mom, and I'm a smart dad, or I'm a smart aunt or cousin, or whoever's helping. And just approach it that way. Like, it's tricky, but we can figure this out. We're going to do this. So I would just try to stay as positive, and it's okay to admit that something's a little bit challenging and tricky, but we're going to keep working at it.
So it's almost as if you're role modeling positive self-talk, persistence.
Right.
You're using your language to help them hopefully internalize that in their own mind when they're challenged as well. Really cool. Another question. With the Digital Academy, they will be following a regular class day. how can we get them to return after lunch period and or stay motivated until that last hour of the day?
I would definitely try to integrate some movement during those breaks in between classes. And this may be where you have to have a little reward system going for a younger child, especially where, at the end of the day, if you need to, you get a sticker, you get to choose an extra fun activity. And then when we get through the week, we can do something extra fun for the weekend. If it's super challenging to get your child through, because it's hard for some children to sit still that long. So they may have to do some things where they're, have some movement during the time they're on the computer. If it's just on a bouncy seat, then that may work for some kids. But definitely take the breaks, get some movement, but set a timer if you need to, and say, okay, this is the time for our break, and then it's time to go back, and then just approach it sort of like, this is your job for the day, and like I have my job for the day, and when we're finished, we'll be all done with this, and we get to have some and choose some fun activities to look forward to. But I think having a visual schedule to sort of represent how the day progresses, you can just check it off as you go. And that check off feeling is really reinforcing for anybody and everybody. So if you have a schedule and as you're going along the day, you check off, we've gotten this finished, we've done this activity, look how much you've accomplished, we're almost there. And then I think that can go a long ways to helping kids get through times where the other aspect would be is if they don't have that like sense visually of how the day is going, and what it just feels like it's endless for them, that it's never going to end. I know that with children, like my own children, when they were younger, we would use a little checkoff system at times where they were doing something they didn't particularly enjoy, and when we finished a task, we check it off. And being able to like get through that and see that the end is coming is pretty powerful, actually.
Yeah, so it's so what you're saying is to take this thing that feels very big and break it down into something that feels manageable.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
And to do take the opportunity for some breaks in between
Mhm.
activities that are intense, because it's hard to concentrate and focus for those long periods of time that children are having to do so.
Sure. That makes me think of I've seen in teachers' classrooms, particularly for the little ones, where they have those color coded, this is our day, and they move the peg along so that the kids
Mm.
can see something like that again in our space.
And
Yeah.
I was just thinking also that if you find that happening, especially for younger children where they have like one main homeroom teacher, I would collaborate with the teacher and say, this has been a struggle getting through the entire day. This is what we're doing. Do you have some suggestions of what you might do in the classroom that we could apply at home? And really kind of getting them on the same page, and they may integrate into what they're doing some ways to keep the kids motivated. It's sort of a way of giving that two-way communication so your teacher can respond to what's happening at home as well.
Right. Keeping that communication is so important. Another question: how do we emphasize that the teacher is still in charge during the school day, not the parent at home, especially for the younger kids?
Wow, that's a pretty tricky one. How does
Yeah.
the teacher? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe you could get a little picture of the teacher and post it on their computer so they can see that face, like the teacher's here. um, yeah, that you can just really maybe designate the difference between school time and home time. And mom's the helper now, and I'm your teacher sometimes, but right now it's your classroom teacher's time, and really try to delineate the two. That that the expectations are different. That even though you didn't leave the house to go to school, it's still school time, and you still have to follow what your teacher says and follow those rules. And so kind of establishing the differences there. It's a hard concept for really young children to learn, but I think that it's possible to, for sure.
For sure. Oh, here's a toughie. Haha. Strategies for possible group projects.
Strategies for, I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last
For the
part.
possibilities of group projects.
Hmm. It really would depend on the age level of the kids for certain. And you're going to be, I'm assuming the teacher is going to give you some guidelines for what is expected of the group projects. I know that in the projects that were done more at the high school level with my children, for instance, their teacher would break them out into separate rooms within Zoom to collaborate during that time. And then it was up to the children, the students, to meet at other times by phone or by Zoom to come up with the end result of their project. And they often use different formats, like Office formats. I forget the name of them. They know all of them, where they actually collaborated on written projects at the same time, and would create slideshows together. So at the upper level, it's a little easier to do that. At the younger level, I think the teacher can still teach them to break out into the smaller Zoom meetings, but just like sort of just giving the analogy of, you really are going into a little room, even though everybody was there, you're going to go into a smaller room to talk to your friend about what you're going to do for this really cool project. And I think when children are younger, it really is going to require a lot of parental guidance, to know what the expectations are, and like guiding your children in that process of collaborating with someone else, to reach a goal, because it's fun to get in a room and talk, but to actually come up with a goal at the end, a product at the end to give your teacher is another thing.
Yes. Let's see, another question. Oh, here's I think an important one for a lot of people. Any advice on learned helplessness? My 8-year-old is fine in brick and mortar, but she needs constant supervision from us learning from home. She pretends to not understand things she can do. So how do we help with learned helplessness, that that expectation that it's going to be a challenge and I need help, but maybe
Right,
they don't.
right. Well, I think that, one way to approach that would be to really try to figure out what her strengths are, and
Mm,
let's capitalize on those strengths and help her become an expert in areas that are stronger for her, because there may be some areas that she truly does struggle with, and that it's harder to get through. I mean, I don't know, the child specifically, but I'm just thinking in general of children that I know and that I've worked with that have that sort of sense of, it's so hard, I can't do it. And it's because maybe it is challenging and it's hard to sustain effort for a long period of time. So find areas they can be strong in, and continue to increase those strengths,
mm,
to build that stuff on, like, oh, I can put some effort into this other thing because I've learned these things that are challenging. And then really just sort of target in that way. So we all have things that are challenging for us and things that are easier for us. And this may be a little more challenging, but it doesn't mean that you can't do it. So we just have to figure out some steps and make some goals towards getting that. And for a child like that, you know, trying to get them to buy into, let me give it a try, let me try this. And then a reward system may be necessary at some point if you feel like you need it. But really trying to capitalize on the strengths, I think, is super key for a child who has that sense of learned helplessness. Like, let's help them become really proficient at the things they're good at while we're still working on the things that they're struggling with, but maybe seeing what is behind that sense of learned helplessness, because a lot of times there may be an underlying struggle going on.
yeah, so that keeping those lines of communication, that sense of connection, which leads right into the next question, which is, I have 2 children starting middle school. I'm also working from home full time. Any tips on juggling, monitoring them, and working with them at the same time, especially since they are making this transition to middle school?
Right, that's a tough transition. And they're both, or I wonder if they're twins.
Nope.
um, I wonder if it would be possible um, to work in the same, like in a similar space, if it wouldn't be too distracting. So then you're just kind of all sort of, you're modeling for them a work ethic. Wouldn't be possible if you're making a lot of phone calls, but to try to share space as much as possible so that you're together and can see. And then developing a really solid schedule and just checking in with them when you have breaks that's the approach I would take. I know that the times my children are older, but I work from home quite a bit. And so I just check in periodically. And as that builds, then you can work in more just checking towards the week and see how things are going. But I would definitely try to share space if possible, but also just check in on a periodic basis, and just have like a written schedule, like I said, posting a schedule for the child, and some goals for them. Um, that may be a good way to start with that.
Yeah, I think that, establishing those expectations, like something I'm going to try, I don't know if it'll work, I'm trying it, is
Mhm.
I bought these door hangers for myself and my partner so that when it's on our door, the kids absolutely cannot interrupt. That means that we're like on a call or I'm on a class or something that they can't. And then the rest of the time they can knock, so when it's okay. So maybe establishing sometimes when it is okay or not okay. I don't know if it'll work. We're going to give it a try.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. You can have just a little communication system, in that way. And maybe they can have a different way also of just sending you a quick little text. I am so stuck on this. Can you come help me? If you're not able to be in the same room with them, and you could communicate back with them. So I think there are some ways that you could sort of get around that and communicate. And I like we've said communication is key, just keeping that up and knowing what the expectations are.
Yeah. So talking about communication, in your role, I would imagine that you a lot of times are kind of like a liaison between parents and teachers and the school system. So this, I think, will be helpful for to get your expertise on. It says teachers are going to be stressed trying to learn a new platform and preparing their classes. What would be the best way to communicate with teachers when we have issues that need to be addressed? Any suggestions for how to broach the subject, or if they're very busy and perhaps they give us a quick reply or don't reply back right away? What are some suggestions for how to engage with that?
I would definitely communicate with the teacher first, and give them the benefit of the doubt, and just start out with a neutral statement or even a positive statement. Try to find a positive statement, and then just be pretty clear in expressing your concern, just sort of based on fact, whatever it might be. I'm confused because, or I'm unsure what to do because this link isn't working, or whatever the issue might be. If a teacher is not responding, then I would just be persistent, communicate again with them. And I think that most teachers are going to respond fairly soon. It could be that they really are trying to navigate all this. I think that probably some teachers have gotten a little bit of training since everything last spring happened. And maybe they'll be a little more comfortable working on these formats. I know that some of the teachers that I know have been doing some trainings through the Department of Education to ready themselves for navigating online instruction in a little, in a different kind of way, and instead of just being thrown into it. I can say quite honestly, just my experience personally with some of the teachers that my children worked with. One had a teacher who was a virtual school teacher in her spare time, and one who was just a public school teacher who was thrown into it. And being a virtual school teacher did not give her an up on it. Her technique was very different, and it was not as hands-on compared to the other teacher. So I think it really is going to be very much a teacher by teacher basis. And just appeal to them and say, my child loves you. They love your class. They're really interested in this. Find a positive somewhere, and then communicate that to them and say, what I'm concerned about is that they are struggling to learn this content, even though they've done some things. And I'm feeling like maybe we need some extension activities, like some way to make it more real for them at home, for instance. That could be maybe a way of approaching something that is a concern, or they're not comfortable using this particular format. Do you have an idea for how we can get more comfortable with using this particular format? And I think that if you can find a way to be positive, express a concern, and then ask for some guidance, then that would be a format most teachers are going to respond very positively to.
Yeah, I would imagine that instead of starting with, an accusation or really, intense negativity, where they might, starting with a positive would keep them open to hearing you out. Yeah, that's a good point. My fellow admins are letting me know here to let folks know that those of you who are asking specific questions to your specific school or your program, please remember that the county has not yet had an approved digital academy plan. So those details are not yet formulated for most schools. So, we hear you, we see your questions. We just wanted you to know that we can't speak to those specifically because we don't know yet. We don't know what's going to be happening. Let me see, looking through here for some other questions. Here's one. How about blowing off steam at the end of a long day? Any suggestions for things that they can do to decompress mentally as well as physically, as a way to help them really make that transition from school to relax time?
Right. Like I had mentioned before, I think trying to stay away from online content. I know it's very relaxing to some people, but if your child's been on a screen all day, it's probably going to interfere with their sleep at night if they spend all evening on a screen as well. So sit down and talk to them about things that they really love to do, that kind of relaxes them. So it could be playing a rousing game of rummy, or something where you are engaging your brain and you're kind of getting a little funny and a little wild at the same time. Or it could be taking a bike ride, or jumping on the trampoline, or something physical, as well. I mean, those are some ways of really good ways of blowing off steam. Um, Going for a walk in the park together, playing tag. Um,
Yeah, finding, and I would imagine too, finding easy to do, short things, as well as some that are more intense and a little bit longer term, so that depending on how your day is going, or the weather or whatever else is going on, that you can have some options too, I would imagine.
Right.
Yeah.
If you have a child that's particularly crafty, just starting a project that they can work on a little bit every evening might be a really kind of good way to unwind. I know that that's super good for some kids. I mean, it could be listening to music, dance out to
Mhm.
music, get on, the Zumba, Zumba app. I mean, it may be digital in a sense, but you're also getting at least that physical, release from an activity that you're doing. So I think really the possibilities are endless, and really kind of are steered by what your child and your family is interested in doing as well.
Yeah, and I'm hearing you say that sort of establishing a transition routine.
Mhm.
So something that, whatever that looks like based on your interests and abilities, to have something that now becomes the marker of, okay, and now your evening begins. So
Right.
that kind of
I
thing.
think one of the things I find personally very difficult is if I've been on a screen all day, which I spend the time, working on a computer. At the end of the day, I feel mentally drained from it, and I'm sure we all can, relate to that. Our children are going to experience that, and so we feel tired. We just want to just rest. But if you resist that temptation to rest when you're having that moment, instead of taking a nap and then messing up your sleep pattern for later, I'm thinking of teens in particular right now, to just actually get up and do something physical, do a task, help out with, a cooking task, for instance. Even it can be quite fun, actually, especially if they're making dessert for dinner, or, making the salad. Then it just, that sleepy feeling kind of goes away, and they actually do decompress, from doing
Mm.
another activity, and they're gaining some other skills. But it can be, really, like I said, tailored to the interest of that particular person, and the family, what they may be into.
Mm. I like that idea of pushing through that initial feeling of,
Hmm.
just lethargy, and just kind of finding it on the other side, that you have energy to push through it. Cool.
Right.
Okay, so here's a toughie, I think. In the unfortunate circumstance where a teacher may have to teach in classroom and digital, the same class, to some students online, some in person,
Hmm.
how do you help your child understand why they may not be in the classroom? So kind of having that, and we don't, maybe perhaps they don't get as much direct contact from the teacher
Hmm.
digitally versus in person. I mean, we don't know, but we're assuming it's going to be a little different. Any thoughts about that?
Right. Yeah. I know that, yeah, there are going to be some situations like that. And, that is tough. And I think it just, as a family, how you navigate that, and how you talk about the choices as a family you made to choose a digital academy versus doing an in class situation. And that not every family has the choice to make those options. Some, their children have to go to school. So it would just be like trying to find the language to, you're maybe not be there, but this is the choice we made as a family together. And we're going to get through this. It's only for a period of time, and, that you can still become just as involved, as possible. It's a tricky thing, for sure. But, I think just really going back to that family decision, and, knowing that every family has to make decisions that are different based upon their needs. And, this is the decision your family made. And, and coming up with ways to make it as fun and cool as possible. When you get to do the digital academy, hopefully there's going to be a lot of flexibility for that family to be able to really do some fun extension activities, and the child can, have the opportunity to do some things during the day. I mean, I that are a lot of fun. I know that my children definitely took advantage of those kinds of opportunities of that they created themselves. Because they're a little bit older, but like, I'm going to pick up a new habit, I'm going to start a new thing that I want to learn how to do. I want to learn to macrame. I want to learn to do this really cool kind of friendship bracelet when I have some downtime. So you can try to really kind of navigate trying to find the positives in the context of this is the choice our family made, and
Mm.
we all have to make different choices.
Mhm. So kind of that, instead of focusing on the cost of the decision, focus on the benefit of the decision.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
okay. Yeah. That's, yeah, we're reframing, I guess. Reframing. Important.
Exactly.
um, Another question. Gonna scroll through here real quick. Okay. Are there different strategies you suggest for different subject areas? So if it's math versus English versus, I don't know, science, are there different um, things that as parents that we can do to help guide them?
Yeah, I think that definitely science and history are so easy to extend with visits to a museum or going out in
Mm,
nature and creating a little experiment or project based on whatever your child is learning. I mean, you can do cooking projects. Math is a little trickier in that way, and so it's finding connections in the community when you're doing things, or helping them become more involved in planning groceries for the budget. How much does something cost, or estimate? If they're learning fractions, get pizza and let's learn fractions using practical techniques. Um, so those are just some kind of, when children are younger, using as many concrete objects as possible. So using pasta or beans to create sets of groups, and you can really use a lot of visuals. And in some ways, if you have the time, make things very concrete when you're learning math concepts for
mm,
younger children. When you're in the home setting, whereas a teacher may not have the freedom to do that as individually for your child. In English, I would, say to really try to gain as much background information. That was something I mentioned before about really having expanding your child's learning. So if they're doing something in literature, um, so let's figure out who that author is and what time period are they from,
mm,
what was normal in that time versus what's normal now. um, is it a fantasy? I mean, is it based in history or reality? And so you can really have some interesting conversations and find some supplemental reading materials that you could share together, that
mm.
wouldn't necessarily be something that your child has to read on their own, that could sort of expand their knowledge and give them more context for what they're learning in that way. So, and
So
I
so
would
like
definitely, I'm sorry, go
so
ahead.
like if they were reading about, like, I don't know, the Great Depression, so
Mhm.
maybe like looking up a recipe from the Great Depression and doing it together. Is that the kind of
Right,
stuff that
right,
you're talking
right. And
about?
just
Okay.
learning really what was the Great Depression? What did people from the Great Depression face? What are some pictures of what they might have looked like? Yeah, what were the kind of foods that they had to eat? How did they make a living? What are the kinds of houses they lived in? How did their lives change? To give them kind of the kind of real richness of what it might be from that time period. If during my one of my children was reading Frankenstein, and it was just that gothic literature was really hard to wrap her head around. She's much more of a reality based kind of reader, and so trying to come up with some ideas about what that time period was like, number one, and what is it to read fantasy, versus something that really is something real that you can concretely understand. So they're just, and it is media, but there are a lot of YouTube videos that can give you some really interesting tutorials to supplement what a child is learning about when it's a hard to understand topic, in literature, for instance. And those are pretty short, and I think those are pretty harmless within the context of everything, you know. But there are definitely some ways to sort of expand on what they're learning in that way. There are so many. I know for the Frankenstein book, one of my children was reading, she did these little online tutorials all the time, and it helped her make sense of it all because the
Mm,
instructor was this was a very hands-off instructor. And so she kind of found some sources in other ways, and we kind of looked at that together. And so I think there are definitely some different ways of doing that. For literature and English, I see most of those resources being books or sort of videos. But science and history, those are the fun ones where you get to go out and do stuff and visit museums and do some experiments. Those are the funnest and easiest way to extend knowledge outside of the computer instruction that a child gets.
for sure. So, bringing it all together, communication, consistency, routine, shared expectations, maybe giving each other a little bit of grace, a little bit of
Absolutely.
patience as we navigate it. Let's say we do all that. and it's not coming together. At what point, as parents, do we look to maybe approaching a professional such as yourself for help beyond what we're capable of doing? When do we know that it's not just the growing pains, but it's okay, maybe it's time to bring in some external guidance on that?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that if your child has a history of learning difficulties and this is sort of being compounded, then I don't think I would wait super long. If they've already had some struggles that you've been working on, I would wait less time than is if this is just navigating a new format. I would give it a little more time. If they've been a successful learner in the classroom and they've been able to acquire skills along with their peers, without running behind, and then now they're in a format that it's making it more challenging, then I think I would, exhaust all those opportunities for extension, working with a teacher. And I would try that probably for, maybe close to a grading period, just to give them time to acclimate to something new and get some consistency with that new format. And at that point, then if they were still struggling and they hadn't made some gains, then I would be seeking some different kinds of advice to see, well, maybe it's something about this format and the way they're having to take information in that is a barrier. And so just try to identify any barriers so that, to keep them from, learning, to their best. But yeah, definitely if there are already some issues that have been in play, I would wait less time for sure.
Okay. So maybe when those midterm reports come out before the end of the grading period.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Karen, any final words for us? Any final suggestions, tips, words of encouragement?
Well, I just want to thank you all for, thank you, Elda, for inviting me to speak. And I just want to encourage you all. I know that this is a hard process as a parent. It's challenging. On the other side of it, there's a lot of opportunity. There's some excitement that can happen for your kids. And hopefully our new normal now is not going to be the same new normal we have midterm, and the kids are going to be able to safely get back to school. So it may just be this brief window of time in our lives where we have this opportunity to be this involved with our kids' education. But hang in there and be in it for the long run. That's all I'm doing every day, trying to stay flexible and stick with it.
I love that. I want to say that again because I think that's really beautiful. The opportunity to be involved in our kids' education. I think that's really beautiful. That's a wonderful way to look at all of the challenges that are here as well. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I want to thank you, Karen, for spending this time and sharing your expertise with us. I want to thank my co-admins, Michelle Snyder-Smith, Angela Daniel, and Amanda Pezzett, who have been behind the scenes feeding questions and managing the chat box. And I want to thank Miguel Maya, our tech guru, who is making this happen. And let you know that next week, our next webinar will be on Tuesday because the school board is meeting on Wednesday next week. And the topic, it will be with Dr. Jennifer Sager, and we're going to be looking at mental health issues specific to virtual environment learning. So be sure to tune in for that. And the recording will be made available later this week on our page as well. So thank you everyone for joining us, and we will see you next week.